Hello. Over the next half hour or so, we're letting our recent past catch up with us once again. In this programme, we're looking back in particular at another two aspects of the way it was that may seem a very long time ago. But of course, that depends on your perspective. If you actually remember the busy trade of salting and packing herring for export, or if you lived through the trying times of World War II, well, it could feel like just yesterday. These are the two topics that I'll be focusing on this week, and watching with me is Janet McBain, the curator of the Film Archive at Scottish Screen. Janet, film from World War II, does that form a major part in the collection?
Mostly it's professional films, but reflecting the home front and how people at home are coping with living through war and living with rationing and morale, keeping morale going. But there's quite a lot of amateur film as well, particularly of civil defence units and home guard exercises and things. So we get a very good picture of what life must have been like for the people who weren't necessarily overseas fighting but were staying here at home and winning on the home front.
And of course there were a lot of situations where you just couldn't produce a camera at the risk of being thrown into prison.
Well, there was that. It was also quite difficult to get hold of raw film stock during the war as well, so there were two constraints really on making film. So it's quite amazing how much has actually been shot.
Janet, thanks for them very much indeed. Also here today is Dr. Geoffrey Burgess, who was the director of the Torry Research Station in Aberdeen, and who was there when our first film was taken in the early 1960s. Geoffrey, fill us in briefly, if you would, on the role of the Torry Research Station. What was it set out to do?
Well, Tory was set up in the late 1920s, in order to give technical and scientific advice to the whole fish industry, with the knowledge that there was a lot of fish being caught, and it didn't always reach the consumer in the best state, and that there were processes which could be developed for the industry, for example, like freezing, which could be better done and could be applied to industrial processes. So it was really the whole range of fish handling and processing at sea and on shore.
And of course it was responsible, or certainly partly responsible, along with other similar establishments, for the introduction of a lot of completely new concepts as far as fish were concerned.
Yes, and I suppose one of the inventions was the Torry kiln, the smoking kiln, which was automated, well, at least was mechanical rather than just a chimney with fish hung up in it and the smoke allowed to diffuse up over the fish.
But I'm thinking of things like minced fish, processed fish like the fish finger. That wouldn't have come along had it not been for the work of places like Torry.
I think that things like the fish finger were really corporate developments by various firms in the industry, but they certainly turned to Torry for some of the scientific advice, for example, on how to measure the quality of the fish. And that was really a fundamental contribution to the fish industry.
And prior to the Torry Lab's existence of the 20s, science didn't really have a role to play in fish. You just caught it, you brought it home, you filleted it, you ate it.
I think that this was true for much of the food industry, and there were many food laboratories set up at about that time dealing with fruit and vegetables and meat as well as fish.
This piece of film that you're going to talk to us about, what was the purpose behind it? What were you thinking when you had it made?
We were interested in trying to put onto film some of the details of industries that were beginning to disappear. Refrigeration was coming in, people didn't want to eat heavily salted products. And when this film was shot, it was really right at the end of the herring curing industry.
Watch it with us, if you would.
Certainly.
And describe what we're seeing, talk us through it. I think I'm right in saying that you and your cameraman went to Peterhead to make this.
Yes.
Round about the year 1960.
So around 60 or 61, yes. Now you see here the fish being unloaded from the drifters, being tipped into barrels to be taken to the fish factory, and solid salt, coarse salt, thrown over the fish. This is partly to make the fish easier to handle and partly to slow down spoilage. Here the fish has reached the factory and is being put into mechanical gutters that removed the gill and part of the gut. Part of the gut had to be left in order to give the very desirable cured flavours that people who liked this product looked for.
This was herring, which was being cured and salted for export.
That's right. Well, of course, it was also eaten in this country, but there was a very large export trade. These gutting machines were introduced just before the war, when it was beginning to be difficult to find large numbers of women who would give up their time to do this.
Quite apart from their time, who would take on a job as laborious and dirty as that.
Yes, it was hard and unremitting labour for hours on end. Here the woman on the right is sorting fish, removing that's damaged, and this is the traditional way of doing it. This is where the fish are being gutted by hand with a quick, dexterous movement. The woman is removing the gills and gut, throwing the fish into one of 3 baskets behind, sorting them out according to size and biological condition. You can see that she's doing it more slowly there, but it's a very quick operation. Just a little sharp knife.
One dexterous movement,
That's all that's needed. And here is the foreman, who was probably a cooper, sharpening the knives, making sure that they're razor sharp. And here are the women standing at the farlands. This process was developed in the Middle Ages, probably by the Dutch. Though exactly what their contribution was isn't quite clear. I personally think it was the introduction of barrels that were airtight.
And it hadn't changed very much from
It didn't
the Middle
change
Ages.
at all. The process was still precisely the same as it was early on. And as you'll see in a moment, the women will then take baskets to the packer. And you'll see the packing operation. There they are, they're taking the fish to where the empty barrels stand, and more salt is then added to the fish.
Obviously you couldn't get a childminder in those days, so you took your children
There were
with you.
children all around the place, and then you see solid salt is being thrown over the fish again to make it easier to handle and to slow down spoilage. And then this woman will then pack the fish belly upwards, very closely, head to tail, with layers of solid salt in between. And this goes on until the fish is right up to the crows, right up to the groove round the top of the barrel. Very, very quick. And you'll see then a shot showing the fish near the top of the barrel. And during the next 2 or 3 days, when it's headed up and stored, the salt then withdraws some of the fluid from the fish, and the fish tends to shrink. So that after 2 or 3 days you find the fish in a saturated bloody brine, known as a brine pickle, a blood pickle. And after it's been packed up, you see the foreman again putting the lid on, and that fish in the barrel is then stored on its side for 2 or 3 days, as I say, and then it's opened up and packed right up to the top to take up the fish that shrunk, the shrinking of the fish. It's got to be packed with fish of the same vintage, of the same batch, and eventually blood pickle is poured in to fill up all the air spaces. If you have air spaces, the fish goes rancid. There are the barrels being stored on their side. This is the first couple of days' storage. And then you will see the barrels are brought together and marked up by the foreman, who then drills the holes for the bung hole. This is what he's doing here. He's just marking each barrel, and the holes are made by hand, and some of the blood pickle is run out, and the whole barrel is packed up tightly with fish, and more blood pickle is then added in to fill in up every scrap of space.
Where was this fish going?
Well, much of it was exported to Eastern Europe, and before the First World War there was a very big export trade. I believe, I remember correctly, that we exported over 13 million barrels in 1913. And that went to places like Riga and Rostock and Poland, of course, and Germany, particularly the eastern parts of Germany.
This is the blood pickle being poured back in?
That's right, that's correct, yes. And it was a product that would keep for many months. Those who didn't like it said that it wasn't improved, but it was no worse after many months than it was when it first went in. But many people actually did like those cured flavours. And in the days before refrigeration, this was very, very necessary. It was really the only way you could preserve the glut of the summer herring for the scarcity of winter time. The salt had to be coarse salt. Fine salt dissolved too quickly and tended to slow down salt getting into the fish, and therefore you tended to get the inside going bad before the salt got in. And some of the salt was actually prepared by natural evaporation in shallow lagoons off the Bay of Biscay.
This is it being prepared now
That's
for
right, it's
export?
now ready for export.
Now that's a trade almost completely gone now anywhere in the world?
I doubt very much whether it's ever practiced in this country now. I believe the Dutch produce a much lighter cure, but I don't think that it's nowadays that it's done on any scale at all, because herring can now be frozen, and people tend to like fresh fish rather than these heavily cured products.
And even at its height, people didn't eat pickled herring as much in this country. It was fresh herring. All the pickled herring went abroad.
It depends when you're talking about. Of course, in the Middle Ages, it was an essential part of the diet, and in fact, the Percy family and Dukes of Northumberland, their household book has survived, and it gives an interesting account of how white herring, as it was called, this heavily cured herring, was given to the children in Lent.
Of course, herring was only one of many brands of fish that were handled and dealt with and,
Yes.
and improved on by the Torry lab. You dealt with a number of, one of your roles was to try and make fish more presentable, more acceptable.
Yes.
How successful do you think the Torry lab was in that? Because we still tend to think of the traditional fish as being the ones that we eat.
Yes. It's difficult, I think, when you're talking about a research institute of any kind, to say this was solely responsible for this development. I think that many developments would have taken place, but they would have taken place 10 or 15 or 20 years later. And I very much regret that Torry has been closed, because I think that here was a collection of experience, of knowledge about fish, which could still be of use, but that's history.
Supposing it were still open, what do you think are the potential advances that Torry might have contributed to? I mean, we've introduced freezing and we've introduced pickling and mincing and processed of all kinds. Where else could science have taken
I
fish?
think that there are very important areas of food safety, food hygiene, and development of new kinds of products, which it's very difficult to say what the future holds. And if you go back to after the last war, for example, and you think of what fish products were available then, you couldn't have foreseen some of the developments that took place.
Quite.
And I think what you're asking is a question that is very difficult to answer for anybody.
Thank you very much indeed.
Right.
Thank you for taking us through that film. Fascinating. Now, after a short break, there's our weekly competition still to come. And you may want to prepare yourself for sites like this in the north of Scotland.
Und auf zur Schuhmacher! Lassen Sie die Leute antreten.